If you hold 500 XRP, the next 6 days may matter more than the next 6 months. And most people talking about April 15th are still missing the one number that actually changes everything. It is not the headline, it is not the speech, it is not even the vote by itself. It is the repricing band that opens if the market decides Washington has moved XRP one step closer to regulatory usability instead of regulatory uncertainty. And in this video, I want to show you the exact scenario math for a 500 XRP holder, why institutions care about this window more than retail does, and the one hidden threshold that could turn a small bag into a decision point faster than most people expect. Right now, competitors are pushing urgency, but they are doing it with vague language. They keep saying clarity is coming, momentum is building, the White House timeline matters, but almost nobody is walking through what that means in actual bag size outcomes. So let's make this concrete. If April 15th becomes a legitimate market catalyst, not a guaranteed moon event, but a real catalyst, then XRP will not need fantasy numbers to create meaningful changes in portfolio value. The move does not need to be insane to be life relevant. Here is the base setup. A 500 XRP bag at $2 is a $1,000 position. At $2.50, that same bag is worth $1,250. At $3, it is $1,500. At $4, it is $2,000. At $5, it is $2,500. Pause there, because that is the first pattern interrupt. A move from $2 to $5 sounds small compared with all the $10 fantasies, but for a 500 XRP holder, that is already a 2.5 times move in bag value. Now here is the open loop I want you to hold in your head, because we are going to come back to it near the end. There is one price zone where 500 XRP stops behaving like a toy bag and starts behaving like an allocation signal for much larger capital. Most retail channels are chasing the final target, but the real story is the threshold before the target. So why does April 15th matter at all? Because the market is not pricing just one vote. It is pricing sequence, signaling, and permission structure. The clarity vote window matters because it gives traders and institutions a date around which they can model probability. Markets love deadlines even when outcomes are imperfect. A vague someday regulatory improvement is hard to front run. A known vote window tied to White House timeline pressure is different, and XRP is always near the top of that list because its entire debate has been tangled with regulation, utility, and institutional rails. If clarity improves, even marginally, XRP gets repriced not only as a token, but as an infrastructure asset candidate. Meme coins can spike on attention. XRP tends to move hardest when the market thinks utility barriers are coming down. Now let's do the tactical math. I like to use 3 scenarios for this type of window: weak reaction, strong reaction, and overshoot reaction. Weak reaction means the vote window produces no clean legislative breakthrough, but it confirms trajectory. In that case, maybe XRP moves from around $2 toward $2.50 or $2.75. On 500 XRP, that is a move from $1,000 to between $1,250 and $1,375. Not life-changing, but enough to reset expectations for the next catalyst. Strong reaction is where things get more interesting. This is the scenario where the market reads April 15th as a serious step toward policy clarity. Maybe not full certainty, but enough to trigger institutional positioning and narrative acceleration. In that band, XRP pushing into the $3.50 to $5 range becomes easier to imagine than most people realize. On a 500 XRP bag, $3.50 gives you $1,750, $4 gives you $2,000, $5 gives you $2,500. Pattern interrupt. That is not retirement money, but it is exactly the kind of move that causes viewers to ask whether 500 XRP was too small or whether they should protect gains. The overshoot reaction is the one everybody wants to thumbnail, but very few people explain responsibly. This is where regulatory momentum combines with ETF speculation, institutional treasury demand, exchange inflows, and FOMO. Could that mean $6, $7, maybe even higher in a fast repricing band? Yes, in a momentum burst it could. On 500 XRP, $6 is $3,000, $7 is $3,500, $8 is $4,000. The point is not that this must happen. The point is that once the market believes the direction of regulation is turning, price can sprint far ahead of the final legal reality. Now let's layer in the institutional angle, because this is where most retail commentary gets lazy. Institutions do not care about your favorite candle pattern. They care about compliance pathways, product eligibility, settlement confidence, and addressable market size. If the April 15th window increases confidence that digital asset policy is moving toward a more usable framework, then XRP becomes easier to model in products, custody conversations, treasury conversations, and cross-border settlement discussions. And shrinking the uncertainty discount is how repricing starts. That is the real mechanism, not hype, not a secret partnership rumor. Repricing happens when the market starts reducing the penalty it assigns to uncertainty. XRP has carried a very large uncertainty penalty for years. Any sign that the penalty is dropping can have an outsized effect. Here is the strong data reveal, and this is where I want to make a simple request. If this style of scenario math is more useful than generic hype, hit like right now because it tells me to keep doing these tactical holder size breakdowns instead of vague countdown videos. Think about how this works in portfolio construction. A fund does not need XRP to become the entire market. It only needs a credible path to inclusion. If ETF narratives, banking pathway chatter, and regulatory motion all start landing in the same 2-week period, you get a compounding effect. Each headline alone may be incomplete. Together, they change what allocation committees are willing to discuss. That is why the April 15th window matters, even if the immediate outcome is messy. The market trades the permission to believe before it trades the final proof. That explains almost every violent repricing move in crypto.mao. Let's bring this back to you personally. If you hold 500 XRP, this is not just about dreaming of a giant number. It is about understanding what kind of position you actually have. At $2, you have roughly a $1,000 speculative allocation. At $4, you have a $2,000 position that may suddenly feel too meaningful to ignore. At $6, you have $3,000, and that is where real decisions start. Do you trim? Do you hold for a second leg? Do you regret not having accumulated more when the bag looked small? And if your bag is smaller, the math still matters. A 250 XRP holder at $2 has a $500 position. At $5, that becomes 1,250. A 1,000 XRP holder goes from $2,000 to $5,000 in that same move. A 5,000 XRP holder goes from $10,000 to $25,000. Same chart, different life impact. Let me make it even more concrete with everyday examples. 500 XRP at $2 is basically a modest travel budget or a decent emergency buffer. 500 XRP at $5 starts looking like several months of rent in many places, a used car down payment, or a real chunk of debt reduction. 1,000 XRP at $5 is $5,000. 5,000 XRP at $5 is $25,000. Those are not abstract numbers. Pattern interrupt again. The mistake is assuming the only outcome worth respecting is $10 plus. That mindset causes people to ignore the entire zone where portfolio behavior actually changes. If XRP goes from $2 to $3.50, a lot of holders will already be dealing with a serious psychological shift. If it goes from 2 to 5, many will realize too late that what looked like a small bag was actually a leveraged exposure to a policy rating event. Now we need to talk risk, because disciplined scenario math means respecting both sides. April 15th could disappoint. The vote window could produce delay, noise, partial progress, or a market reaction that sells the news. If that happens, XRP could stay flat or even retrace. A 500 XRP bag is not magically protected. That is why the cleanest framework is probability bands, not certainty language. There is also timing risk. Sometimes the best move happens before the event, not after it. If large traders decide to front run April 15th, the strongest upside can arrive into the window, then cool once the headline actually lands. The market often rewards anticipation more than validation. So let's close the open loop. What is that threshold zone where 500 XRP stops behaving like a toy bag and starts behaving like an allocation signal? In my view, it is not $10. It is the $4 to $6 band. Why? Because that is where a $1,000 starter position becomes $2,000 to $3,000 without needing fantasy assumptions. And that is exactly the type of move that tells both retail and small capital allocators that the market is no longer pricing XRP as a sidelined asset. It is pricing it as an asset being reconsidered. That is the real April 15th insight. The vote window does not need to instantly justify some giant moon target. It only needs to push XRP into the threshold where perception changes. Once perception changes, allocation behavior changes. If you are holding 500 XRP, the question is not whether that bag makes you rich overnight. The question is whether this catalyst window can move your bag into a new category of seriousness. For many holders, the answer is yes. And if you are sitting on 1,000 XRP, 2,500 XRP, or 5,000 XRP, the same logic scales fast. So watch the headlines, but watch the reaction even more. Watch whether XRP starts holding higher lows into the vote window. Watch whether institutional language shifts from speculative to usable. Watch whether people who ignored XRP suddenly start modeling it. That is usually the tell. And before you go, tell me in the comments what bag size you are actually planning around right now. 250 XRP, 500 XRP, 1000 XRP, or more than 5000 XRP. I want to know which holder scenario to break down next. If you want the next tactical XRP setup before the crowd catches it, subscribe, because the next few days are exactly the kind of window where one policy headline can reset the entire conversation in a matter of hours.